So you know the story of the Evil Dead by now. No, not the recently announced remake. I'm talking about the old Evil Dead, the good one. You know, the one where a bunch of kids decide to sleep out at a crusty old cabin in the middle of the woods and stumble across a tape player along with a strange looking book bound in human flesh and inked in blood. In typical stupid teenage behavior, they play the tape and all but one end up dead. The last remaining one just loses a hand and gets abused quite a bit, but after donning a chainsaw and a sawed-off shotgun, he eventually repels the evil but gets sent back in time where he leads a bunch of primitive screwheads against the onslaught of the approaching Deadite army. Or so you thought. No, what really happened was that Ashley J. Williams, the sole survivor of the cabin massacre, ended up getting institutionalized at Sunny Meadows Asylum due to authorities finding his claims of demonic possessions and Necronomicon Ex Mortises to be a bit outlandish. But of course, outlandish is the name of the game in Evil Dead Regeneration, available for PC, CD-ROM, PlayStation 2, and the original Microsoft Xbox. The version we're looking at now is the Xbox version. Evil Dead Regeneration is the third in a trilogy, shall we say, of games released in the early 2000s, comprising Hail to the King and A Fistful of Boomstick. However, while Hail to the King and Fistful of Boomstick took place after the third film, Army of Darkness, Regeneration is more of an alternative sequel to Evil Dead 2. Not necessarily a proper sequel to the other two games, but more of a what-if scenario. The what-if in this case being if Ash wasn't sucked in time to medieval ages at the end of Evil Dead 2. The end result is some stock scientist with a goofy accent trying to unlock the powers of the Necronomicon and unwittingly releasing the evil powers within. So the first level has Ash roaming around the asylum looking for his usual wares, and then, well, shit happens. Eventually you'll get a pistol, which does enough to keep you in one piece until you get your trademark shotgun and chainsaw, which is pretty much the most commonly used instruments of destruction in your battles against the Deadites. Of course, beyond the asylum awaits new locales, new challenges, new demonic forces, new weapons and tools of the trade, and Sam Raimi. What? Evil Dead Regeneration is pretty basic in its design. For the most part, you'll traverse these different levels looking for weapons to acquire, extensions to obtain, puzzles to solve, and deadites to slay. The puzzle-solving aspect is oftentimes straightforward affairs. Other times you're left to wonder what you're supposed to do before common sense takes place, and you eventually figure it out. Sometimes these puzzles are required to advance further in a level, but completing certain puzzles in the level will unlock additional life extensions and pages of the Book of the Dead, which will unlock bonus material such as concept art and lots of short interviews with Bruce Campbell, which is a reward well worth chasing after in my opinion. The combat sequences in Regeneration are pretty straightforward affairs as well. Deadites will show up and try to maul you. You return the favor by inflicting pain and suffering upon your enemies until they spew green mist, upon which you can perform a quick one-button finishing move to, well, finish them. Some Deadites are easy to dispose of, others not so much, but the numbers games can get overwhelming at times, and the Deadites will learn new tricks as you progress further into the game. Of course, as you do progress further into the game, you'll come across life extensions, extra weapons to even the odds, and eventually the ability to turn into Evil Ash, which essentially gives you a quick boost of power. Oh yeah, and there's also the midget. You see, after escaping the asylum, Ash will get a new partner named Sam Raimi, a half-human, half-deadite midget who has an unlimited number of lives. Sam Raimi can be helpful in many ways, acting as a second partner in your fight against Deadites, or it can be used to assist you in other ways. At certain points in the game, there will be icons that will let you take control of Sam Raimi, usually guiding him through some area of the game in order to progress onwards. It's usually a nice change of pace. Sure, mowing down bad guys with a chainsaw never gets old, but neither does having a midget ride a giant deadite and smash through all kinds of wonderful shit. It's truly a wonderful sight. For the most part, Regeneration is fairly straightforward in terms of challenge. As you progress, you will obtain new weapons and new attacks that will assist you tremendously in the coming battles against the Deadites. The combat isn't that deep. There's a few combo moves you could pull off, but enemies can be hacked and slashed and shot to death without much effort for the most part. Eventually, you'll have to learn to use a few of the more advanced techniques to take on the smarter Deadites, and boss fights generally require a bit of strategy to conquer, but this isn't anything overly complex. Your main worries would be overcoming the numbers games that the Deadites like to play every so often, but again, it's not that big of a deal. Regeneration isn't a walk in the park, but it's not a terribly long game either. Chances are if you really get into it and you try to get through without much trouble, it'll probably take you a better part of the weekend to beat everything. Controlling Ash is actually not that bad of a deal, actually. Each button on the controller has a different function, but it doesn't feel overly complex or convoluted. It almost feels second nature, and it's really easy to get into the controls and move about the game. Camera control on the right stick works just about fine for the most part. There's a couple points where camera will do what it wants, but it never gets to a point where it'll try to fuck you over or anything. For the most part, control and camera control is just fine. No real complaints in that regard. Visually speaking, Evil Dead Regeneration is nothing to write home about, but they get the job done. Ash bears the likeness of Bruce Campbell, no surprise. The various environments and locales are actually quite nice looking and fit the mood of the Evil Dead world. The overall world in general just oozes that evil presence throughout, and everything just moves about fluidly and without much issue. So in terms of capturing the atmosphere and the visual style of the movies, Regeneration does a good job of it. The only real negative that could be levied against the graphics is that they're lacking a bit of polish. Some of the characters look a little rough around the edges, and there's usually an overall low quality air to the overall presentation, but it doesn't really distract from the experience. It's only something I've noticed when I was reviewing the game footage for editing. It's not a big deal in the long run. The graphics are good, let's just leave it at that. Once again, Ash is voiced by Bruce Campbell, reprising the role after 3 movies and 2 prior video games, so it's safe to say he should know how to play the damn role because he does such a fucking good job of it. Sam Raimi is voiced by brother Ted Raimi, who always does quality stuff as well, and he plays the role of Sam Raimi to perfection, I think. In fact, the banter between Ash and Sam Raimi that occurs at times is funny stuff. At least I think so. But generally the voice acting is just quality stuff. It's not the bored, tired voiceover stuff that I typically hear in video games. There's actually some engaging banter, plentiful quips, and actually it takes a while for this stuff to get tiresome because there's just loads of energy and life to these voiceovers that you could just spend half an hour just sitting back and listening to the banter alone. And there's quite a bit of it, actually. So yeah, the voice acting is probably the strongest point for Regeneration. The rest of the cast, well, they do a fine job, but it's mostly Bruce Campbell and Ted Raimi that carry this thing throughout. And they nailed it. They nailed it to a T. I guess I should talk about the sound effects and the music. Well, they're okay. The chainsaw sounds like a chainsaw. Shotgun sounds like a shotgun. Splats sounds like splats, you get the idea. Sound effects are fine. The music's also fine. There's a couple nice tunes in there, a couple noteworthy tunes in there, but it's just fine overall. But really, it's just overshadowed by the awesome voice work. I mean, just really funny, genius stuff. That's why the short bits with Bruce and Ted behind the scenes is worth unlocking and getting those pages for. Just listening to them, in those interview bits is just gold. Pure gold. Funny stuff. Evil Dead Regeneration was originally released as a quick budget title. I got this game new back in the day for 20 bucks roughly. And though it probably doesn't go for that much today, Regeneration is very much worth your money, especially if you're into the Evil Dead movies. It's a pretty straightforward hack and slash action adventure shoot 'em up thing that's light in depth and polish, but packing in loads of fun and charisma. Sure, the combat is slightly glorified button mashing, but there's a charm to it. It's always satisfying to shred some demons with a chainsaw, and most importantly, you have a midget to use and abuse to your heart's content, which really adds to the overall flavor of Regeneration. This is never going to be a top A-list game, but then again, the Evil Dead movies were B-movies. Overall, Evil Dead Regeneration is a pretty fun game that's lacking in polish, but god fucking damn it, it's a joy to play. Give it a go.